saying she a gold digger.
Media ownership
But she ain't messing
concentration
with
is a
no
controversial subject. The subject holds various aspects that contribute to its complexity. Three key elements concerning the subject are widespread of media ownership concentration's existence from American society to the growing global community, the pros of it and the cons. Many often think of America when they hear media ownership concentration. They may think of General Electric and all the media sources that fall under its control. However, issues of media ownership concentration is present in many other places, particularly Europe, Canada, and Australia. An explored pro is the quick speed at which headlines reach all types of media sources. Another pro would be the assurance of consistency of such headlines due to the limited number of projecting sources. Finally, the cons of media ownership are expanding. One entity holding the power to so many outlets, the door is open for an implementation of owners' bias on all subjects, including politics and economics. Another aspect of this implementation is the lack of competition. Without competition, pushing companies to further refinement of their subjects and products, the large corporations have license to produce whatever they wish, applying whatever bias they desire. The subject of media ownership concentration is intricately complex, an ongoing list of aspects.
One of the positive aspects of media ownership concentration is the increased speed that news can travel. Since there are only a few major companies that own almost all the media, if one of the companies has new information, it is able to broadcast it on all the different forms of media that it controls. News Corporation has control of many different magazines, newspapers, radio stations, television stations, and websites. If a company were to obtain important information on something, they could easily broadcast it along all the different forms of media that it controls. The same thing also allows news to travel worldwide at a quick pace. Since News Corporation owns papers in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and the Caribbean, along with television channels that broadcast worldwide and websites accessible to nearly everyone, it can spread information to nearly the entire globe at a breakneck pace. Concentration of ownership also allows information to be more easily controlled and prevent alterations of meaning when going from one company to another. Much like the game telephone that many kids play, as information goes from one place to another, it can change the meaning. The more it goes through, the more drastically it can change. With fewer companies, a drastic change in meaning when transitioning from one company to another is much less common.
What used to be a business composed of many private and public broadcasters is now composed of relatively few large firms that over the years have been able to swallow up many of their competitors. As a result, the public is now graced with a much more controlled type of production that can either be based off the ideas of the owner, political ties, or economic success. Depending on what the owner of a corporation wishes to get through to his audience, this can affect what content he allows his corporation to produce, including the stories allowed and how in-depth certain stories can go. One example would be Robert Murdoch's huge conglomeration and how the Fox News channel is heavily controlled regarding the content. It is easy to see the huge bias which exists within this particular corporation as a result of beliefs from Robert Murdoch himself. One of the most common types of biases is those of political basis. Because of the huge media groups that exist, they have the ability to strongly influence politics and present what they believe to be accurate. Most news stations are guilty of this particular trait, in the way they all attempt to promote what they see as politically correct. They will attempt to control this through the particular stories or interviews they decide to broadcast, whether regarding politics, individual ideals, or economic goals. The media organizations are now on a new agenda which will revolve primarily around what they want the public to see and believe.
Media ownership concentration is not only an aspect of American media corporations, but that of global corporations as well. In Australia, the Broadcasting Services Act of 1992 controlled the media ownership of the country. Even with the law in place, there still exists a high concentration of media corporations. The newspapers and press are controlled by 4 corporations: Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, John Fairfax Holdings, West Australian Newspapers, and the Harris Group. They combined to create the Australian Associated Press, which distributes its news to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. This corporation and the Special Broadcasting Service are the only two government-owned channels that are free to air. Most of the media in Australia is broadcasted through these channels, and therefore Australia has very limited diversity in media ownership. Canada's media ownership is regulated by the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, known as the CRTC. Canadian media is dominated by few corporations such as CTV Globe Media, CanWest Global, Rogers, Shaw, Astral, Newcap, and Quebecor. Although a few small media corporations exist as well, currently almost all of Canada's television stations are run by national media conglomerates. Most of the press is also owned by the same conglomerates that control the media, but there is some newspapers that are not owned by the same corporation. Because the issue of concentrated media and ownership became so controversial in Canada, the CRTC limited each corporation to only two types of media in the market, and the CRTC favors new and local broadcasters in an attempt to broaden the diversity of media ownership in the country. In Europe, there also exists a high concentration of media ownership. Axel Springer AG is one of the largest media corporations in Europe, controlling over 150 newspapers and magazines in over 30 countries in Europe. Axel Springer AG is the leading media corporation in Germany, as well as many of the surrounding Eastern European nations. Bertelsmann is another major media corporation in Germany, and it is one of the world's largest media corporations. In the United Kingdom, Rupert Murdoch owns a good amount of the media, and the Daily Mail and General Trust own the rest of the majority of the media. In Ireland, the Independent News and Media owns many of the national newspapers. In Italy, the largest television corporation, Mediaset, the largest press corporation, Mondadori, and the largest advertising company, Publitalia, are all owned by the Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi. The Il Giornale, Italy's national daily, is owned by his brother. Therefore, much of Italy's media is controlled and regulated by the government.
In conclusion, there is no real deciding whether the concentration of media ownership is good or bad, because as stated earlier, it has pros, but it also has cons. While media ownership concentration does speed up the travel of news with a good consistency, it decreases the variety of perspectives and is more controlled, limited, and generally biased. There is no deciding whether concentration is better, because in the end, even if major companies today were all split up into smaller independent companies, by the end of the century, several large companies will emerge to dominate the media industry. Currently, media concentration around the world is only limited in some places, and even these limitations are restricted to what they control, meaning that media concentration still exists, just that there's less of it. In the end, since the companies of the world are so concentrated and there is little variety to the biased media they produce, it is up to the consumer to actively seek out a variety of opinions and truth in what the media presents.
Next time you get tired of how concentrated and biased media is, don't do this. Go and research a news story or find alternative sources of media.
Missing link on the brink of destruction.